Hello, and welcome back to the Health Marketing Collective, where strong leadership meets marketing excellence. I'm your host, Sara Payne. Today, we're kicking off a series of themed episodes leading up to the Health Conference in Las Vegas in October, just a few short weeks away. For those of you who don't know, the HLTH, or Health Conference, is the IT conference in the health industry, featuring the who's who of big players and thought leaders innovating the future of health. The theme for this year's conference is Be Bold. So we're doing a series of episodes all about what it means to be bold in marketing. Today's topic is bold breakthroughs, how to capture media attention in what is a very crowded healthcare landscape. To join me in the conversation, I've invited one of the industry's top journalists, Mr. John Lynn. John is the founder and chief editor at HealthCareSCENE, which includes both Healthcare IT Today and SwaayHealth, two robust communities and content platforms for news, blogs, podcasts, and conferences. Healthcare IT Today is the leading healthcare IT community with over 17,000 articles, 600 podcasts, and a community of over 200,000 followers. It's a real privilege to have you on the show, John. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Sara. I hate hearing my bio, but I appreciate you inviting me on to share our perspectives.
Always a little awkward, isn't it, John, to have to hear that about ourselves? But no, you're a real pro at this. 600 podcasts.
Yeah, I can't really keep up on the count. It's interesting how, the 17,000 articles, I think I feel more than the videos, although, it's interesting. I guess it's one of those lessons that you learn in life, that if you just consistently do something, the numbers aggregate themselves. And so I think there's a beauty to that I've certainly experienced.
Yeah, so pick the theme today really is kind of focused in on that health conference theme of Be Bold. And I wanted to start by asking you, John, what does being bold mean to you? What do bold brands look like to you?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because you are 100% right that there is a lot of noise in the industry. And I would say that most healthcare organizations are going after fewer and fewer journalists, bloggers, influencers, et cetera. And so there's this disconnect between the number of people that have something to say and the number of people that are going to share your message with the audience that you're looking to go after. And so I think you have to be bold. But the problem is, how can you be bold when everyone is saying everything? Literally every solution at health is going to be an AI-powered solution that can solve burnout.
Yes.
Right? That is a challenging thing for any healthcare organization that's trying to stand out. And so ironically, one of the ways to be bold maybe to actually be something different. Maybe it's to actually speak softer about what's happening, but really speak to the pain points that an organization is feeling. And so, I think that's maybe one way to approach it, is to say, hey, everyone else is saying that we're an AI solution and burnout's a problem, cybersecurity is an issue, et cetera, right? How can I say something that is different and that maybe, we at Healthcare IT Today, one of our focuses is always how can I be useful to the CIO? And so instead of saying we can do this, change your message and say, I know what your problem is because I've talked to 10 CIOs that are all our customer, and your real problem is XYZ. And that actually may be the boldest message you could offer, rather than we do XYZ, which, by the way, is SwaayHealth is our marketing community. If I were to write a Bible, that would be probably the first page of the Bible, which is nobody cares about you. They only care about what you can do for them. So,
100%.
being bold and saying, I understand your problem and here's what your problem is, maybe the boldest thing you could do.
I love that point, and I think you're right. I think there is, I'm going to call it sort of this gloss or this varnish that, a lot of the solutions in the companies have today, which is we all have to say these combination of buzzwords, right? It has to say AI, it has to say, to your point, it solves burnout, whatever that combination of buzzwords is in your particular space. You got to combine those things, but we're not getting to the realness of the differentiated way that your company is specifically solving that problem. And I love your point about really talking about it from the customer's point of view, right? Not, I have this wonderful, great thing over here, X on the shelf that you really need. It's more, I understand your problem. And if I were in your shoes, here's how I would go about solving it. And oh, by the way, I have a solution that does something like that, but really coming at it from their perspective.
Absolutely. And I think the other problem is that when you go to an event like health, there is such a wide variety of perspectives. And you have to like, okay, so we're going to have payers there. We're going to have pharma there. We're going to have provider organizations there. And it's like, how can I make sure I find my target audience if I'm someone who just sells to provider organizations? Or, it's interesting, you talk about some of the booths. Many of the booths sell to the other health IT vendors that are exhibiting. And so, that's a very different approach that you have to take, and you have to take a different boldness. I'll throw one other thing since we're talking conferences. And this is kind of ripped from the headlines at the recent Black Hat conference. A number of these security vendors were trying to be bold. They were trying to stand out. And one of them had these ladies in shades, like literally human, women in shade with these lampshades on their head. And when you look at it, you think it really is just a lampshade, but it's actually a human inside of it. And there was another one that did another, somewhat egregious thing, essentially it's the old school booth babe type of approach. And so they both, tried to be bold. They were trying to make a case for, why you need to address security and why they were trying to get the attention of the people there. And they did it in a really bad way. So you have to be careful on how you're bold, right? I think it's one thing to be bold in your stance and your perspective on where the industry is going and what the industry needs. But in this day and age, it's amazing that someone thought it would be okay to be bold in a way that was quite sexist and misogynistic and a bunch of other things you don't want to be associated with. So you have to be careful in how you're bold.
Yeah, agreed. When you first said shades, I was thinking sunglasses, but lampshade.
Literally a lampshade on these women. It's sad.
Interesting approach. Yeah, I mean, I think being bold means two things to me. It means a willingness to talk about something other than yourself, and two, a willingness to say the things that need to be said, right? I think that, not trying to please all people, really getting to, there are some major issues in healthcare that need to be addressed, right? And you've got all these different stakeholder groups that are all trying to carve out their portion of the revenue opportunity. And let's be real, sometimes we have a solution that maybe isn't going to leave one of those stakeholder groups in the best position, cushy position they're in today. And I think sometimes we have to be willing to have those conversations as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I would talk a little bit more about health. I know you go and you publish lots of news coming out of the conference. It's a big job. So many conversations happening over those few days, the number of panels, the keynotes, the press announcements that are happening. How do you and your colleagues decide how to spend your time at the conference, and which stories are going to get covered? Like, how do you do all of that, John? And sort of like, how do you think about prioritizing your time heading into a big conference?
Yeah, well, thankfully we have a great team that is behind me doing a lot of the hard work and heavy lifting. I think we did 50 videos last year at Health Survive. I forget which one's which, but anyway, we did a lot of videos, right? And a lot of capturing of that. And so, yeah, credit to my team behind me that processes it, publishes it, does a lot of the work along with me. But when it comes to how do we choose, I'd say there's a number of things. The first one is, for me, it's all about people. Sessions for me are not that interesting. Maybe I'll hit one or two. I live, eat, breathe, and sleep this stuff. So it's pretty rare that a session's actually that interesting to me. I'd rather connect with people and ask the questions that I want to ask rather than, quite frankly, some of the terrible questions that get asked on stage. So, and maybe that's a little bit of, spoiled journalist, that people will answer our questions, right, when we want it. So it's kind of nice that, we can have that opportunity to ask the questions that we want. So I guess that's the first thing. The second one is I'm going to it without any agenda. My agenda is to discover what the messages are that are going to be useful to the CIO, to the IT director, to, the IT professionals at healthcare organizations. And so I don't really have an agenda other than to find useful content for them. I will say it's evolved a bit. Certainly we do a lot of paid, sponsorship and paid content with different people. And so, that's actually probably our first line of scheduling is we schedule the paid ones. And so, I actually see the paid stuff not as changing what we would cover about that company, but it changes the priority. So we do schedule you first. And so,
Sure.
It's a different way of looking at it. And, if someone were coming and saying, hey, I want to pay for a video with you to pitch our company, I'd be like, no, that's not what we do, because that's not going to be good for me. And it's not going to be good for you, because if you're a health IT company, we need to share your stories. We need to share the value that you created. We need to show that you are an expert of whatever you're talking about. And then that will be the best way to sell your company. So anyways, that's, I guess an evolution of the media industry, that we definitely, schedule all the paid stuff first. That changes the priority for us. And then after we finished, scheduling the paid opportunities that we're going to do, then we look at the editorial opportunities. I feel bad for people like yourself and other PR agencies that pitch us, because my response is, hey, we're scheduling the paid, and about a week or two out, then we'll look at the editorial. And so that is just the reality for us these days as far as we do. But then once we get to the editorial, I look at it in two ways. One is it a hardcore topic that I love, like ambient clinical voice, and I've never talked to that company before? I might, schedule someone like that. The second one is really about the person, I think, even more than the company, although maybe if it's a company we've talked to a dozen times, that's, a different story, I guess. But, I want to see who is that person and what could they share with us if we have them hop on video. I want to know that information, and I kind of evaluated on that. Sure, is the company doing something interesting? Are they in our space? If you pitch me a pharma clinical trials company, I'm probably going to ignore it, because we don't really do that. We do the provider side. So, that's obviously an easier filter. And then as you go down the path, we also do what we call our bonus features, which is where we feature like the announcements that are happening at the conference. And so for that, I might just take your press release, ship it over to my colleague, Brian, who does the bonus features. And then he includes that in kind of this roundup article of all the big announcements that happened at the conference.
Yeah, well, I don't think you have to be apologetic at all about your approach. You said you feel bad for, right, the PR reps out there that are trying to get time with you. But I think I love that you guys are straightforward about it, right? Like, this is the approach that y'all have chosen to take. And I think being straightforward just helps people understand, right? And then there's an option, right? You can either choose to be part of the sponsorship route or not, right? So, and then you mentioned, I wanted to go back to the point you made about terrible questions being asked on these panels, because health in particular invites a lot of journalists to moderate those panels. And, some would be more sort of, like competitors to yours, and some not, right? Because they would be just different. They're going after, they have a different audience. How would you, if you were charged with reformatting that, right? Or coming up with the approach for what questions are going to get asked, how they're going to get asked, whatever, how would you change that to, in your mind, shift from are they too much softball questions? Do they need to get harder hitting? Like, what would you do if you were working with the organizers of these conferences to improve some of the quality of what's coming out of those panel discussions?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of aspects to this, and the first is that health's doing a good job. So I don't think they necessarily need my advice. They have a model that's working, and their model is bring big names. Right? Yes. They want the biggest names. And if it's not a big name, they want a big name company, which is similar to a big name, right? So either they need a big name company or big name, and they want to put as many of those big names on stage as possible. And, and then they often go and get the big name publication, which aren't competitors with us at all, but also don't know the healthcare industry. So I think sometimes that's a miss, depending on who they get, right? It's great if you could have, one of the, news agencies, NBC Today Show people interviewing on stage because it feels like a big name, but they don't really understand the healthcare industry. So for me, that falls flat. But you also, health obviously has to take into account they don't even need to cater to me, frankly,
right.
Which is
no,
fine,
I hear what you're saying, right? Yeah.
Right? And I'm someone who lives, eats, breathes, and sleeps this, right? Whereas, maybe the CIO at an organization may find that interesting. And also you have to remember that what they're doing in many regards is entertainment. And so 100%. What they're doing is trying to entertain. And so if entertainment is your goal, then that's great. And, I may even go to some of the entertaining sessions. I've been to a lot of, the comedy ones where it's like, this has nothing to do with healthcare IT or healthcare at all. But hey,
it's John taking a break from covering the hard hitting news at the conference. Put your feet up for a second.
Exactly. But no, I mean, as you go down the level though, I would say, for me, the goal is having people who understand a depth of understanding of the topic and are willing to go into that deep level. And I think that is the problem. And this is true at every conference. This is not just health. In fact, some conferences are much worse than health at this, the ones that are like 9 months out to even get a session. You're like, you want me to submit a cutting edge session that's
right.
9 months out and somehow I'm going to have to present and my slides are due 4 months before it and I can't change it. Like that just doesn't make sense to me at all with how quickly technology is moving. But anyway, if you move beyond that, to me, the question is, are they willing to dive into the stuff at a deep level and not just say the same things that we've heard at 6,000 other conferences?
Yeah.
That's what I think people have a desire for. And that's where you get frustrated is when you've heard the same phrase over and over. If you've seen one healthcare provider, one Epic install, you've only seen one, right? They're all different. That kind of stuff that we've all heard. No one wants to hear it again.
Yeah, I agree. Well, so broadening the conversation a bit beyond health. Obviously, it is a noisy conference, as you've said, but healthcare in general is noisy. And to your point, there's a proliferation of AI solutions out there. So much news all the time. From my perspective, it feels like the news cycle has gotten a lot more, I'm going to call it competitive. That's the word I'm going to use from my perspective than it used to be. I know we've heard stories about newsroom layoffs and shrinking newsrooms. As a journalist, what's your take on how the press landscape has changed in recent years? The sort of pressure on the business model and that sort of things. Is this really happening? Is it optics that it feels more competitive, or is it actually there's a number of things that we can point to and say, yeah, actually it is more competitive?
It's definitely more competitive, and they're disappearing all the time. The business model's hard. It's hard to create a business that works in media, and we see that. And the old structures, of paying, huge salaries to these journalists is a really tough one. Just being frank, we can get content for $100 an article or $50 an article. It's like, that's not a livable wage, right? Like that. Right. So how do you do that? So we're seeing those pressures. I mean, let's use a recent conference that I went to. In the past, there would be 30 journalists there. When I went, I think there was 2 of us.
Wow.
2 of us at a conference that usually had 30, right? Like it's amazing how small it's gotten. And I think what's even more so the case, they aren't traveling to the conferences. So right. They may even be there and they may still be covering healthcare technology or revenue cycle or whatever, but they're not going to the conference. So they're just not seeing the value of going there, which ironically, we're going to more and more conferences. We're going to a lot of user conferences, which is also an interesting trend. A lot of the people who would normally go to conferences are going to their user conference. Because if you're a provider organization and you're trying to justify budget, it's hard to justify budget to the large behemoth conference that's around whatever versus a user conference where you're like 90% of my day I'm using this software. I need to go to that user conference because this is really impactful to my organization so they can justify it. So yeah, it's definitely a problem. On the SwaayHealth side of things, every year at our conference, at our annual conference, we do a media panel. And it's a press panel. You get to talk to the media, ask your questions. They get to, air their gripes and say, stop doing this. It annoys me. Right.
Yeah, so right.
It's
fair.
A very popular session, but I'll say it's harder and harder to fill because there's just not as many news organizations for us to be able to tap into to come and beyond that. So 100% it's a challenge. And, but here's the other side of it. We are seeing this like rising tide of influencers. We have initially it was like social media influencers, which is still somewhat the case, although Twitter's definitely taken a hit, and but LinkedIn influencers, we're seeing the expansion of newsletters. So these newsletters are essentially media organizations for many people, and they're putting out some really great content there. We obviously the blowing up of podcasts. It seems like everyone has a podcast these days, although, you have to look at it kind of like in the early days of blogs and the early days of social. You're like, okay, who has real followers and who just creates great content, but no one reads it,
Yeah.
Here's a fun little story for you. We started a company called Influential Networks, which ended up kind of being the predecessor to our sponsored content programs at Healthcare IT Today.
Okay.
But the idea of Influential Networks was like, let's put all the bloggers into a network. And let's, I already have connections to all these advertisers, and, some of these blogs have lab stuff. Well, I don't really write about lab stuff. So we could sell a lab company, their stuff using the influential networks with content and ads and all that. Right.
Yeah. Smart.
We aggregated all the health IT blogs into this influential networks. And then what we told them is we said, hey, we want to put a ad on there and we're just going to co-promote each other. But at least then it would give us some data to know, like, okay, who has what traffic so that we can sell you appropriately. Because I don't want to be selling a $10,000 package if you're getting 50 views a day, right? Like that doesn't work for either of us, right? That's going to hurt you. So we put them in a network, we put ads on each one, and we looked at the data. And the shocking thing was there was only one company in all of the blogs that had any data that was meaningful. And the one company that was there was more of a pharma one, and they actually had some advertisers and were doing quite well. Everyone else, turns out, they created amazing content. Like you look at it and you're like, you guys are spending so much time creating great content, but no one's reading it. And so unfortunately, there wasn't much we could do. We sold a few, speaker packages at conferences, or we combine it with Healthcare IT Today, which did have more readership and whatnot. But it was just like, wow, okay, you guys are killing it. You're killing yourselves on creating this great content, but no one's reading it. It was kind of sad.
Yeah, well, I was going to ask you, you've kind of already gone in that direction on a couple of different levels. Like, there's been quite an evolution in people's consumption habits, right? We've seen the explosion of the podcast format. And how do you all look at that, in terms of adapting your reporting styles, the editorial approach to meet the preferences of your audience? Are there certain formats that you find work really well, in particular for your audience? And then how do brands make sure they're giving you the type of content that you need?
I mean, I think there's a couple of things. One, the biggest shift we've seen, and we kind of saw it in this first stats you shared about us. We've published 17,000 articles and 700 podcasts / videos. All of our podcasts are videos as well.
Yeah.
We're just like, we're already on. Why don't we do video? This doesn't make sense. Let's do both. Right. And so we have. But, if you would have pitched me 4 years ago, 5 years ago, I would have been an article first kind of guy. Oh, maybe I'll do an interview. Maybe I'll do a meeting, whatever, right? And let's do an article, send me a quote, things like that. Now, if you pitch me and I decide, oh, I like this company, I'm going to say, do you want to do a video? So we've
Yeah,
switched from being
100%.
content, article, written word first to now being video, podcast first. So if I want to tell a story, I'm like, let's just hop on the video. And to be fair, we've kind of created a machine that lets me really easily do a video, and then it becomes an article and a video and a podcast and goes on our newsletter, on social. So I'd say that for us is the biggest change, is that if I'm going to do something, I'm probably going to do a video. Or, occasionally I'll do some reviews of products. So I'm still doing that. And we've been doing more and more reviews of products where we can try it out, especially when it's more of a direct to consumer fit. We're doing more of that as well. But that's been a huge change. The other change that I think is interesting is how we're syndicating the content. So before, it used to be, how many page views do you get, to an article? How many, video views? How many downloads? Those are all great. How many email subscribers do you have on your newsletter? I want to know that information. And now we're actually sharing a lot more information. Obviously, this is more with our paid, so I think that the unpaid probably care about it in a similar fashion. Is how many views are you getting of that clip that you shared from the video on social media? Right. And how many views are you getting there? And it's not even how many YouTube followers you have. It's how many views did that our video get on that, because we have all that data now. And so that's changing. How many Instagram views are we getting? How many TikTok views are we getting of that video? I don't care if you have 6,000, followers. If you're only getting 10 views, that doesn't matter, right? Or, we actually just did an analysis, so I'll give you a little deep dive into what we're doing. But for our, and this was obviously our paid videos that we were doing the analysis of, but our paid videos average 4,000 video views from us sharing. And this includes LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube, right? So it's across those 5 platforms. And, it gets 4,000 views. Now you have to look at that and you say, okay, well, what's the average view for a healthcare B2B content? Well, if we compare to non-B2B, 4,000 is not a lot, right? You need the millions. But in healthcare content, if you get 100 views on a B2B healthcare IT content, you're doing pretty well, right? So
agreed.
I think that's interesting. That's maybe the evolution as well, as far as how are people consuming it. I call it the ADD generation that wants the quick hit. That's all we have time for. We don't have time to go and do it. Or if we do, maybe the quick hit is like that gateway drug to the longer form content that says, oh, I'm going to watch your 1 minute video and, I enjoyed it. Oh, let's watch the whole 20-minute one or 30-minute one. So that's, I think, maybe how we've evolved, is that we have to cater to that person who just wants a quick hit of healthcare IT and not necessarily wants to dive into this, 20,000 word essay that's going to dive into every element of what you're offering. And, just to finish off with one other thing, it's interesting how that's evolved even for Google. Google loved long form content. They wanted the article that dove into every aspect of every detail of that topic, because that's who they wanted to send. But that's evolving as well. So it'll be interesting to see how that continues to evolve, especially because many of us aren't going to Google anymore. We're going to the social platforms.
Yeah, that is an interesting comparison there as well. And I think, the other thing that video does, it goes back to your point about connecting with people, right? So it's not just a story. It is the people. People want to buy from people, right? They don't just want to buy from a brand or a company. They want to buy from a person. And I think there's this element of additional sort of trust and understanding in a relationship that happens through that. And so I think that, the proliferation of technology that allows us to do podcasts and video conferencing so easily gives us that additional benefit of developing what feels like a relationship. I mean, I don't know about you, but I've listened to a ton of podcasts where I've never met the host, but you sort of feel like you're friends with the host, like, in some weird way, because you spend time with them on your drive or wherever your workout, wherever it is you're consuming this content, and you come to rely on them, and there's a relationship there.
Yeah, a couple of things there. One, here's a quick story. I was walking down the swag line at Chime, the CIO conference, and the CIO sees me. He's like, "Hey, John, I know you." And I look at him and I mean, he's a tall Norwegian guy. Like, I would have remembered him, like,
Sure.
I don't know him, right? Like, I'm like, and luckily he bailed me out, right? He's like, well, I don't know you, but I listen to you every
But I know
morning.
you.
You're like every morning, you and that other guy, Colin. Yeah, Colin. Yeah, you and Colin. I listen to you every morning, and you're like, I get my coffee and I listen to what you're doing, and I hear what's going on. He's like, but it was funny. He like reacted as if he knew me, exactly what you said, right? And so I think that's beautiful. But you said something else really interesting, which is authenticity and connecting with humans. And we go through this a lot when we talk to people, and we say we don't want what we do to be too polished. Because if it's too polished, it comes off as inauthentic. And we know how, there's a lot of health IT publications out there that produce a beautifully polished, produced product, right? And my question to them always is like, is that what you want? Is that achieving the goal that you want? And for us and the people who work with us, they understand that what we are going to produce is two people sitting in a bar at a conference talking about what really matters. And that's who they want. It goes back to George Bush, right? He was the guy you wanted to have a beer with, is what everyone said. And that's why he was successful, is because people like having a beer with someone and like having a real conversation rather than this produced thing that I feel like the marketing team put together, to try to sell me on something. There's a big difference. I stole a word from our SwaayHealth community called Rawthentic, which is it's raw enough that it's
love
authentic.
that.
And so that's what we shoot for with our, and this is an evolution as well, I think, in consumption habits. Before, people did want that produced, edited, thing. But I think now, especially in the B2B market, they want something, you need a level of quality that's high enough that they're like, okay, this isn't just some, fly by night operation, but you also need a level of authenticity and humanity in your discussion to be able to relate to that person and to have them believe what you're saying. Like, for example, I tell people, hey, here's some seed questions, and we're not afraid to give seed questions. It's like,
sure,
that's good. It gives you time to think about what's going to be talked about. That's good.
And be thoughtful in your approach.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, and you could even write out your answers, but then you need to throw it away.
Yes.
Because if you have to read it to me, that is the last thing you want, right? So it's fine to prepare and write out those answers. It's even fine to have a couple bullet points. Oh yeah, I wanted to talk about that. That's fine. But I've only had one where I was just like, she is reading to me. And it was awful. I was just like, I can't do this. And then I asked her a question that wasn't on the list. And she was beautifully authentic. She knew the content. Okay. She knew what to say. But her company had forced her to read this, and it made for an awful video. And so anyway, that's a part of that evolution as well. Just to offer one last line, what I tell people is like, if you have to prepare a lot for a video with us, then we either have the wrong person or we have the wrong questions. And so we need to adjust it, because you should know this well enough that you don't need a lot of preparation. A little bit, sure, to think through it, to think through the plethora of examples you have and which one might be best. That's fine. But otherwise, you should be able to do this pretty cold.
I agree. I think this is a great takeaway for marketing leaders listening in who, it's their job to prepare spokespersons for spokespeople for interviews, but also for the executives too. I think this is really important. It's like, you want to be, you are an expert in your area, in your field, in your niche area. There's a reason why you're being called in. We have to take away the, say this, but don't say that. And here's 6 other rules on top of that, because I have seen people flounder in that situation because they've been given too many filters, and they're thinking about what they're supposed to say and not say versus
that we want you to incorporate into this answer. And if you don't,
versus having a conversation, right? And that's what I tell my clients all the time is like, here's three bullet points that actually talk about the thing we're here to talk about today from A to Z, like a logical story of, beginning, middle, and an end. That's it. Like that's what we're here to talk about today. And don't worry about it being this specific sort of end to end, perfectly polished, and you give them too many things and they're gonna show up frazzled, because I think any human being would in that situation. I think there is such a thing as over preparing people. But I think it's also knowing when it's maybe not the right person, right? Because it's just, maybe they're like really great scientist, really great expert, know their shit, but maybe like it's just not their thing to sit down and be real with John Lynn. Like that's just not, they can't do it.
Yeah, that's fair. Choosing the right person really matters, and personality matters. I have that. Yeah, I mean, it's one of the things we've learned over time is that my energy can transmit to them, but only to a certain level, right? Like
Sure.
there's some people that you can't, you can only infuse so much, right? But if they see and they feel from the interviewer a certain level of energy, they usually try to match it. And sometimes I have to lower my energy to match theirs too, so that it's not overwhelming to them. And sometimes I do better than others. But I think the other thing that's missing here is you do have to understand the publication that you're working with. And I think that's why many people fear the video interview, especially when it's recorded, and you don't want to go back and do retakes and all this, that they've have in their mind that the journalist is trying to get them. And in some cases they are. To be fair, there are journalists that are trying to do it.
Very rarely, right? Like this isn't 60 Minutes.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely not 60 Minutes. It's funny you said, you talked about us and our publication, how we approach it. One of the best compliments, I just got an email right before we were recording. They're like, you really are the nicest publication out there. We call ourselves the friendliest media organization in healthcare IT. And that is our brand, and that's who we are. I joke that my colleague Colin is from Canada, and if he's not nice, they kick him out, right? But it's really just who we are as people. And so our goal is to push the industry forward. We don't do breaking news. We don't do investigative journalism. We want to highlight the successes that people are having and push it forward. That's our identity. That's who we are as people. That's who we are as an organization within HealthCareSCENE. That's the type of people that we want to hire. We're not trying to go to drive views because of some salacious story or headline that we did. And so I think that's the other piece of it, is going into the interview knowing, hey, this is how John or Colin or Healthcare IT Today approach content. It can put them at ease, right? In a really big way, to say, hey, we're not trying to get you to fumble so that we can, realize that Taylor Swift said this about Travis Kelce, right? Like that's not who we are, right? That's not what we do. Instead, our goal is to highlight the successes and to share some of the challenges to get to those successes. That's fine, right? Let's be authentic about what it takes and the work that's required, but let's share that in a way. So understanding the publication really matters as well.
Yeah, and I love that you really kind of went into that whole, like we're not, like we might sit on opposite sides of the table, but we're kind of on the same team, because what both sides of the table really care about is helping to educate this audience or help solve a problem that they have and introduce them to new solutions that are going to be transformative to them. So it's really the same goal, right? And if we think about it that way, of like we're all trying to collectively move the industry forward through, positive educational stuff that actually matters, then we're on the same sides, and it's not a, gotcha sort of situation. But I will say, John, that you guys are a bit of an anomaly in terms of the energy, as you described it, and the personality that you bring to it. You don't get that from every journalist and every interview. And sometimes that lack of connection on the other side can impact an interview, because someone's like, oh gosh, they're really not into it. Or, sometimes I prepare my clients. It's like, sometimes it's just a really green journalist. Obviously not speaking about you, but they actually are really intimidated to be interviewing a CEO right now. And they don't know what questions to ask. And so they don't want to look dumb. And so they're very quiet, right? They're either over there trying to take a ton of notes, or they're afraid to ask a question that makes them look stupid. And so I prepare them for the personality of the journalist too, because I do think that can impact an interview, and kudos to you and your team for, really doing different with that. And to your point, like, you're probably getting the best out of people based on the energy that you bring. And you can't do it for everybody, right? There's still going to be some people you can't lift up, but I think that's pretty amazing. And I know our team feels it too when working with you, John. There's a lot of journalists that can be really rude to work with, or not responsive. And I get it, y'all are busy and not every email is going to go responded to, but I think you guys make a real effort to relationally to work with your sources and really be respectful to those resources, which I think and sources, which I think is just really refreshing to see.
I mean, I appreciate the kind words, and it's great to see that it's felt on the other side. I think what's interesting is that, in many ways, we're almost not journalists. Like I joke with people, that like, I'm a journalist when I need a press pass, which is true. And to be fair, we've published 17,000 articles.
Right.
We're journalists.
You're the real deal. You are the real deal.
But it is interesting. We don't look at it that way, right? Like, my goal, like, we don't have a division of church and state. Like, our goal is to provide value to the CIO and IT leaders at hospitals and healthcare organizations. And if I can do that, that is the goal. And it doesn't matter if it's paid. It doesn't matter if it's through a PR agency. It doesn't matter if it's direct. It doesn't matter if it's the customer. I mean, that's why a lot of journalists don't want to talk to executives. And I'm like, executives talk to 1,000 different customers. Sometimes they have the best insights because they're not just getting one customer's little perspective for their little environment. They're talking to thousands of them. And then they can say, hey, here's 5 different perspectives across these 1,000 CIOs that can provide a lot of value. So, I mean, that's where I think we're lucky, is that I always focus on what's the value we can provide the end reader. And if it's valuable, I don't care if it's a vendor and their partner, or if it's the customer. Sure, customers are great. It's great to hear the firsthand, but it's okay to embrace all of those things.
Yeah, absolutely. Love that thinking. Well, John, our time is coming to an end, but I will tell you, I did not get through all of the questions I wanted to ask you. So might have to do a part 2 of this at some point in time. But before we end, I would like to switch gears for a quick fire segment. I've got 5 questions for you. What is your favorite way to unwind after a long day?
After a long day, I mean, it's funny because I go from work to kids, that's
same.
I will say, the most therapeutic thing I do is probably playing disc golf. It's, I get out and chuck some plastic. It's a nice way to just relax, throw the plastic. I get a little exercise as I'm walking around. I prefer ultimate frisbee, but to unwind, that's probably the best, is going and playing around a disc golf and getting out in nature a little bit and walking around, a little exercise. It's probably the best way for me to unwind at the end of the day.
Yeah, I'll double down on the nature aspect of that. If you weren't a journalist, which you just said sometimes you don't always see yourself that way, but if you weren't a journalist, what would you be?
I'm tech guy on Twitter, so I'm a tech guy at heart. So, I come from that, right? I implemented an electronic medical record. I did IT support top to bottom. I worked in a lot of data centers. So I probably would do that. If HealthCareSCENE one day gets acquired or something, it's interesting. I don't know if I could get a job in the tech world anymore. I probably could get a job in the marketing world more than the tech. So I guess I probably would be chief marketing officer somewhere, if not as well. So it's interesting how my career's kind of evolved.
That is interesting. Maybe you can be the one that makes disc golf an Olympic sport for the next Summer Olympics.
Yeah, I think ultimate will get there before disc golf because it's a little more ubiquitous across countries. Yeah. But frisbee in the Olympics would be awesome. At the end of the day, I'm an entrepreneur. I think that's what I would do. So I like to use technology to create value for people. So that's where I really identify.
I can see that. I can see that's how your brain works. What are some of your favorite podcasts that you listen to on a regular basis?
It's pretty funny as someone who has 3 and about to launch a 4th podcast. I don't subscribe to any really regularly. I'm more of a social consumer of podcasts. So I let the social media determine which are the best episodes of podcasts, and then I listen to them. So I do listen to a lot of different podcasts, but I usually generally let the social media determine it. So, I mean, I have a mixture of some health IT ones that I listen to. Hit Like a Girl is fun to listen to and hear some different perspectives there. I also listen to sports ones. I love a lot of BYU sports stuff, so I'll hit a lot of those. I love Colin Cowherd on kind of the sports side of things. And then, I definitely like the Kelceys. I'm all about Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce. That reference was a real one for me. I like seeing what's up with them. They do a good job. In fact, I would say I take a lot of my inspiration for what we do on the Healthcare IT Today various podcasts from sports. Sports does a great job creating content, and I often take inspiration for them for what we do.
I love that. I think you're right. I think coming off of the Olympics and the massive production and success they had in Paris is just a great example and illustration of that. They just did a fantastic job, Snoop Dogg, and just creating a lot of sort of entertainment and draw beyond just the 40 seconds or the 30 seconds that the athletes were running on the track. So yeah, I agree with you. A lot of great inspiration for marketers to draw from that, but also love your earlier point about finding podcasts that are worthy to consume based on social media. Another great piece of advice for marketers. If you're going to go to the effort of creating a podcast, make sure you're putting the most valuable nuggets and snippets on social, and then letting the algorithm take care of it from there. Last question, John. If you could attend one show or attraction while in Vegas, what would you pick?
Oh, I thought you were saying conference, which I'm totally biased to SwaayHealth, which has often been in Vegas. But no, you mean like a fun show?
Yeah, like just for fun. Not that you got time for that when you're in Vegas covering a conference, but I mean, let's pretend you did for a second.
Well, and it's nice that I technically live in Henderson, not Vegas, but 15 minutes from the Strip. So, we actually don't go to shows because when you live local, you wait for the free ticket. But oh man, how could I choose? Like Cirque du Soleil might be the top, but if I could see Celine Dion in her prime or possibly Garth Brooks right now, but all of that aside, any of those are winners, by the way. But I would go to Faith Hill I did go to Faith Hill when she came to Vegas, and I would go to her because she's my top anything artist. But if you want, here's one that people won't think about, and this is Terry Fader. It's a lower cost ticket. The guy is supremely entertaining. He has a great comedy writer. It's got music, so you get the music. And by the way, he's doing it all as a ventriloquist, which you're like, wow, wait, yeah, John's recommending a ventriloquist, but yes, it's comedy, it's music, and it's like, oh my gosh, he's doing this as a ventriloquist.
Wow. Cool. Well, I feel like I know you a lot better than I did when we started out the conversation today, John. Thanks so much for being here. Where should listeners go to catch more of your great content?
Yeah, so I'd say the best place to go is healthcareittoday.com for the health IT listeners out there. We obviously publish a lot of great content there, and you can link to all the podcasts and like and subscribe. That would what my kids would tell me to do. Then if you're a healthcare marketer, be sure to check out Swaay.health. That's Swaay with 2 A's. And Swaay.health, we have all the same things, right? A publication, email newsletter, podcasts, videos, but all focused on the healthcare marketing profession.
Excellent. Be sure to check it out, folks. And if you enjoyed the conversation today, do us a favor and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. That's it for today. Thanks for being a part of the Health Marketing Collective, where strong leadership meets marketing excellence, because the future of healthcare depends on it. We'll catch you in Las Vegas.